university. I'm currently looking after my 3-year-old daughter full-time, which is a job in its own right. It's interesting that we've heard the talk that we've just heard by the Society of Dyers and Colourists, who, in my opinion, make a lot of their money from information. And in spite of that, we're going to have to face some of the challenges that we're going to hear a little bit later at the SLPC AGM, where the society itself is going to have to pose some questions about what's going to happen in this future. All membership organisations are undergoing this evaluation. I'm going to speak today really about the problems of the leather industry's information. And I don't want to offend anybody, I don't want to be controversial. What I want to do is I want to pose problems. So maybe as a society you could think of maybe a new role that society could take in the future to help solve some of these problems. It's a personal interest of mine ever since I started in the leather industry is, how do we collate our leather information? And I have a garage at home full of leather information, which I hope to use one day, and as part of the talk we'll speak a little bit about that. In 1756, an additive known as adamantium was added to vegetable tanned leather, and this resulted in the leather being completely fire resistant and allowed blacksmiths to handle molten objects for short periods of time. Is this true? Well, the point is it could be true, but the leather industry, the way it stores this information, no one will ever know. So this, the information snippet is two-pointed. A, we don't know whether this existed, or whether this happened, and if it did, have we done enough to protect that information so that generations today would know if this was true or not? Do we know that the information that we have today is going to be sacred and be usable in the future? So let's just have a look at information in general. Obviously, the information has undergone radical changes over the ages. Right from the beginning of time, where information was passed on by word of mouth, people used to remember everything and hand it down to future generations to listen to. We've had inscriptions in stone, cave paintings, petroglyphs, recording things on papyrus in ancient Egypt, progression from papyrus into paper, and then scribes who meticulously copied, very valuable texts over and over again as word perfect as possible. And with each generation of information transfer, we've had an increase in the accuracy of that information. We then get on to printing. This is where we're now mass producing the amount of information that we're putting into printed form. And we have the evolution through all the different types of printed media. Gutenberg Press being a very significant development in terms of printing of the Bible, for example. And in 2005, we have an estimated 45 trillion pages of written text being produced. So paper information was obviously a very, very valuable, and still is a very, very valuable way of storing our information. With these vast quantities of information, we have the development of libraries. We heard a talk earlier about bookbinding and keeping books for incredibly long periods of time. That's the Gutenberg Press. Libraries normally started out as collections of information. I say Egyptian, those two areas obviously part of Assyria, historically the Syrian region, but part of the Egyptian Empire. The Greeks, Alexandria Library, very famous library. The Roman Empire, Constantinople, Alexandria again after it was captured by the Romans. The Imperial Chinese Library is the first time we get a classification of books and storage and ways in which we can find the books rapidly. A lot of the information that the Islamic scholars had were unfortunately plundered during the various conflicts that we've had over the ages. Computers, same, nice progressive path. 1801 we have the first type of machine type of computer following a physical program, holes in a punch card which the computer is reading. Alan Turing helped to translate the computer away from a physical program into an algorithmic mathematical program. We start seeing commercial computers having their origins in 1951. And then with transistor computers replacing vacuum tubes, allowing the miniaturization of our computers to the size chips that we get today and the size of computers that we have today. That laptop being a good example of that. The microprocessor, where you have an integrated circuit allowing you to process vast quantities of information in very short spaces of time and allowing storage was quite a radical step. With the computer, We see the emergence of the internet, and at this point, many people we go the internet. Carl's going to spout off about the internet. I'm just posing the electronic versus paper-based versus electronic medium, and kind of speak about the advantages and disadvantages of the two just now. But we need to get through the internet, so those people that are anti-internet will just bear with me for a second. The internet was around for quite a long time. Basically from the 50s onwards, you had some version of the internet, but many of them were not very public. Tim Berners-Lee, who was working in Switzerland at the time, is recognized as being the inventor of the internet. And this was the first time that the internet became public. And people could then access, they could browse using a very simple browser, go through the information, find information that they could find useful. And we have the emergence of what we see today in the World Wide Web. And that was effectively 1989. It became public in 91. Berners-Lee effectively invented it in 1989. With the internet, you start getting interconnected networks. So if there's one network at CERN in Switzerland, you have IBM's network being connected up. That's what we mean by interconnected networks. And obviously, we're then allowing ourselves access to vast quantities more of information. Most of you will know that the internet is dominated by websites, web pages containing information, text, drawings, pictures, whatever. Blogging, some of you may or may not have heard of blogging. This is predominantly opinions. People thinking, writing their thoughts down, and instead of using paper, they're using an electronic medium. And then, of course, the advent of electronic mail. It's the bane of some of our lives. It has sped up things, which allows us to send messages rapidly across the world, and variations on electronic mail exist in virtually every business environment nowadays. In 1998, the internet was changed. A new protocol was adopted in 1998, and we're currently running what they call Internet Protocol 6, which allows more internet addresses, for example. The internet address that you type in is not exactly an address. As soon as you type it, those letters in it get translated into a number. And the problem with the previous version was that we were running out of numbers. And so this new protocol allowed us to increase the amount of numbers that we could assign addresses to. That's just how vast the internet has grown. With the internet, we have a number of tools emerging. People needed to be able to process the information on the internet a lot faster. And so we see search engines, Yahoo, Alta Vista, being two of the first. Culminating in today what we know as Google. Everyone Googles, Google their names, Google everything. So search engines became a very, very valuable tool for anyone using the internet. Anyone come across P2P, peer-to-peer? File transfer protocol. Napster, the sharing of music. This was one of the earliest examples, which allowed people to radically think about sharing information. Not only will you be able to access web pages, but you might be able to share your files, dye color recipes, or peer-to-peer is the way to do it. Blogging and microblogging. Some of you will have heard of Twitter being the most common example of microblogging, where instead of writing pages and pages and pages of your opinion, you're restricted to, I think it's 160 characters. And we'll speak a little bit more about that in a second. Social networking, Facebook, Bebo, MySpace, all of these social networks allowing us to expand our friendship circles, keep in touch with people. Again, a little bit more about that later. YouTube, video sharing, absolutely revolutionizing the way in which we share our visual content, particularly videos. Google's recently acquired YouTube, and there's been some massive changes in YouTube and the way that it provides service. Voice over IP, it's really changed the face of telephony, allowing a substantial reduction in the cost of our telephone calls. Some of you will use Skype to phone relatives in New Zealand. That's been enabled through the use of voice over IP. Transferring of data with a telephone line requires a lot less bandwidth than speaking on a telephone line. And so we have a reduction in costs using voice over IP. And then, of course, Internet Protocol television, where live streaming of television, not just videos, but continuous streaming of television over the internet, allowing some channels to offer up to 25,000 channels of television. And this is an area that you're going to see more and more in the future. If you look at the timeline of the two industries, if you compare, say, for example, the leather industry, having its origin unknown back in time, pre-ancient history even, all the way up to modern times. You're looking at 4,000 plus years of industry. You would expect vast quantities of information that industry would have. It's like 4,000 years to collect all that information. So we should know everything there is to know about leather. If you look at the IT industry, starting roughly 1936, 74 years ago, if you have a look at its development and its current presence in terms of information, just put a little table there at the bottom comparing the amount of information. The leather industry, 2 main English-speaking journals. The IT industry, 66 journals in 74 years. Less than 10 magazines in our industry, 100 plus magazines in the IT industry. If you do a search for leather information, you get 142 million searches on Google. If you put in IT information, you get 8,190 million and more. We'll give you a final number. If you have a look at the number of leather schools around the world, of various sizes, you'll be looking at less than 10 for leather, whereas you've got at least 12,000 plus schools where you can learn IT technology, and less than 50 definitive textbooks for the leather industry compared to 17,000 plus books written on the IT industry. So there's quite a huge disparity between the amount of information that's available for the leather industry compared to the information that is available for a 74-year-old industry. So there's some fundamental questions that we need to ask. Well, what has hampered our treatment of our information? Why is the IT industry so much better at keeping the information than we are? Why are they so good at stockpiling it? Has the actual creation of the IT industry allowed us and other industries to be able to keep our information better? Now this goes against what a lot of people say in terms of paper industry is better for storing information compared to electronic information. Well, this doesn't seem to be the case, because with the IT industry, they were able to store a lot more information than any other industry previously has. And I'm not just picking at the leather industry. If we actually do the same comparison of this compared to, say, for example, the medicine industry or pharmaceuticals, you would have something very similar. Maybe a few more journals, a few more publications, a few more Google searches, but a very similar picture. Have Tanners fully appreciated the power of the information? And they say information is power. Is the amount of money that we make too low for us to reinvest back into the stockpiling of our leather information? Are we able to attract academics who are able to synthesize, analyze our information? These are some important questions. If we look at the resources that the 2 different industries have, the IT industry have a very much higher caliber of personnel, present company excluded. And they have a lot higher investment in their industry in terms of information resources. Our reinvestment in terms of information is quite negligible. Government and international funding bodies tend to fund our research and our information stockpile, whereas the IT industry, a lot of it comes from within their industry, private enterprise, sponsoring schools and textbooks and things like that. How much should we reinvest? Well, this is a very important question. Obviously, any kind of investment needs to have a return on investment calculation done. We don't have the figures, so we very often can't do a return on investment calculation to see whether it's worth our while to reinvest in the industry. We don't have the numbers, quite simply, because we don't have the information, we don't have industry statistics, some of the additional problems. Why doesn't our private industry, our tanneries, supply money back in? Again, back to the margin problems that we were speaking of just now. So what information do we have on leather and leather making? We've had 4,000 years of history. There should be a lot. Well, there isn't. It's very hard to find. I say very little. There are a lot of books and publications and things that if you start scratching around you find. But compared to other industries, we have very little. We have a very little web presence as well. And most of the web presence that you find when you put in a search for leather information or leather technology will either end up in pornographic content or retail, selling products, selling chemicals, selling machines, things that are related to actual sell. So again, people with a vested interest in putting that information out there, something that we will return to just now. We basically have 2 international universities that study leather full-time, obviously the Indian University and the Northampton University. There's a very limited number of libraries that contain definitive collections of leather information. And I'll just mention here an example. Having worked there, I've seen the extent of vandalization of that leather information. There are a couple of 19th century textbooks which on record appear to be in the library, but I can't find them. They're not around. They have been taken out of the library at some stage. Students cutting things out of books, defacing, just wear and tear in books. These are things that are commonly happening. Do we value that collection enough? Another question that we'll come back to later. And then, of course, another very worrying fact is that we see a lot of our industry moving to the East, and that tends to be moving away from the English medium. And so a lot of that information that is currently in English, we might see change. We might see more information being contained in other languages. The actual leather industry, do we specialize too much? Are we able to compete with the IT industry? The IT industry covers multiple disciplines, whereas in the leather industry are a highly specific subject. We can attract very limited funding because of our specialization. We can only attract very certain academics because of our specialization. Do we specialize too much? Should we not be saying as tanners, we're actually people who manipulate materials in a research manner? Should we maybe just generalize it a little bit more? And there's some of the examples of which we could enter into other bigger disciplines: materials, surface coating, process engineering. These are all things that we could start publishing in journals and start getting collective knowledge back from. And then again, the question of paper versus digital. This debate will go on forever. Some people will say paper is absolutely the definitive way that you want to store information. Other people will say no, you need to go to digital. It's a low-cost option, etc. So you need to look at some of the factors that affect whether you go pay for a digital. What is your survivability like in terms of paper versus digital? Is your material susceptible to fire? Well, both essentially are susceptible to fire. Obviously, electronic information is very vulnerable to magnetic influences. Just use the deletion. It's a lot easier to delete a huge book on an internet, on a computer, compared to destroying large volumes of text. The searchability, again, electronic media will always win hands down with that. The way in which we can search electronic media will always beat the way in which we can search printed materials. The access, what do you need to be able to get hold of that information? Do you need to have a computer literacy? Do you need to have a machine? Do you need to have infrastructure, internet connection? These are all things that will influence the way in which you can get hold of this information and use it. And then, of course, the credibility. Anyone can publish anything on the internet, and that very often lacks citation, lacks verification. This can be problematic, it can be quite vulnerable. So if we move over to digital media, we might find that we start losing some of the credibility of our information. The concept of memes. This is the idea that if you have a research outcome, if it's commonly accepted, commonly repeated, commonly spoken about, it eventually becomes common knowledge, it becomes more outstanding. Whereas if you have a very lesser known research output or an idea, if it's not really spoken about, sometimes it just drops off the radar completely. No one can read every single piece of leather information text and remember it. So there are thousands of leather ideas that have already been done, solved leather industry problems, but have been lost because it has never become a meme, so to speak. And then, of course, the reproducibility of the information. Digital information can be reproduced very rapidly, copied, sent over the internet, backed up, put onto disks, sent all over the place at very, very low cost compared to the printing costs of ink and paper. Inks are very costly, so we're always going to find that electronic media is going to be a lot cheaper than the cost of paper and journals. What types of information does the leather industry have? Well, we have our journals, which are technical, very specific, very scientific. They are formal writing, often with full citations, justifying the arguments. They often include their experimental methods, so that if anybody wants to repeat those methods, they can. They have the materials and methods, and everything is lined up in a recipe-like manner, so that they can be repeated. Very often, journals are peer-reviewed, which means that a number of people are actually making sure what is being said is as credible as possible. And very often journals don't pay for these people that submit. They don't pay the people who submit articles to them. If we have a look at the two main journals for our industry, you all know this, the JSLTC and the JALCA. And if you do a rough calculation of just how many articles we have, very rough calculation, about 6,220 scientific articles. Do we have all of those in a collection somewhere? I very seriously doubt it. Maybe the British Library will have it. Maybe the BSLT will have 99% of it, BLC a little bit, SATRA, there'll be places. Maybe there are enough members still around with copies that we'll be able to eventually find 100% of the number of articles that I've estimated there. But again, it does pose a question, which we'll come back to later again. Generally, journals in the scientific community are scored. They have what they call an impact factor. Eigenfactor is one of the most common scoring methods for most journals. But the one I'm using here, because there were no leather journal entries or scores on the actual eigenfactor when I looked. But one that I did find was something called the H factor, and you can see that JSLTC scored 15, JALCA scored 19, the journal called Nature scored 599, and the Journal of Materials Research scored 83. Journals of Material Research being a slightly more general topic. Maybe we need to be in bed with the Journals of Materials Research to increase our score rate, start publishing in that journal, for example. And how these things get scored is the journal peer-reviewed, which is why JALCA is a little bit higher than JSLTC. How many citations in the journal to other journals, and how many other journals cite those particular publications. How many cross-discipline articles do we have other industries publishing in our journals? We have very few other industries publishing in our journals. And how many of our articles are taken to other journals for publication. And then, of course, author rating. And we have a few illustrious authors that score quite highly in there. We see Professor Covington will often increase the author rating on that particular journal whenever he publishes in JSLTC. And so what we want to try and have is people who publish a lot in our journals, publish a lot in other journals, publishing in JSLTC, to try and increase the score rating to get anywhere close to some of the numbers that you can see in the picture. Magazines, this is generally non-technical articles, some technical articles. The balance, whether they got it right or not, is always up for debate. A wider range of articles, sometimes citations, sometimes not. Very advertising dominant, they have to pay for publishing costs, so you get a lot of adverts. Our leather industry, do we have a lot of electronic magazines? Not really. They're starting to get a few. Leather International and World Leather do have an e-zine type of presence on the internet, but if you compare it to other industries, they'll have a lot higher e-zine presence. And also, again, don't generally pay for the contributions. They generally appeal to a non-technical audience, easy read value, normally a smaller word size, normally a lot less complex wording, and that allows you to read the magazine a lot easier. And this is what appeals to so many people reading magazines. It's highly summarized, and this often loses the detail that's required for further experimentation or documentation of things as we know it, currently know it. But this suits the modern lifestyle. We often want to read something very quickly. We read the title, first couple of lines, something in the middle, and something at the end, maybe a conclusion or something. But does this detail loss dumb down our understanding of the leather industry? And if we move towards magazine articles, which are paid for by advertising, do we find that we lose the detail that's going to be required for future generations? The decisions that we made now in the tanning industry, will people in future generations know why we made those? Is there enough detail if we record our scientific findings in magazines? Should we be taking highly technical articles and summarizing them or giving readers the flavor in magazines? I think that's a very positive step. I think that for every technical article we should have at least 6 non-technical articles published too, to help people understand some of the technical detail that we're putting in there. Industry publications, these are things like your material safety data sheets, information on machinery, tannery equipment, etc. There are numerous quantities of information of this nature. But they tend to be quite secretive and anti-competitor, just enough detail to give you the information, but not enough detail so that the competitor can find out what they're talking about, really. They're not normally archived, which can be a bit of a health and safety nightmare if anyone's had to deal with a closed tannery and trying to find how to dispose certain chemicals which are no longer produced, to be able to find them in a material safety data sheet so that you can dispose of those chemicals correctly is quite a nightmare. Now this is a massive problem for the industry. We should not be in a situation where chemical supply houses are producing chemicals and not storing this material safety data sheets with a centralized structure. Factory paperwork, not really classified as anything really important, but actually is. Normally destroyed after a set amount of time. People think, well, what do people want all these recipes for? I'll just chuck them out. Those are valuable pieces of information that future generations could access and use. If we've solved problems which future generations could actually benefit from. They're obviously quite specific, but innovations could be used to help other people. And they're not thought as contributing to the industry, but actually do. Leather research. A number of institutes that do leather research gets fewer every day. Some are completely non-productive. Thinking of some of the institutes I've been in Africa, no research output. They get the funding, but nothing really comes out of it. Normally focus on applied research industry, saying there's a problem, give us a solution, and looking for that. Very, very, very few research organizations look at blue sky research. And remember, blue sky research, although it's costly, and people go, oh, we don't want blue sky research, it results in massive changes in an industry, in chemicals and processing. And so we should not ignore it. We should not think it's not useful. It is. Who funds the leather research? Is it going to be the industry itself? Where is the definitive list of research questions that the leather industry has? Or are we simply just going over the questions that we've always gone over the last 100 years? Do we not have a list somewhere where we said we were interested in this topic, and this was the answer, and this is the new topic that we're looking for the answer for? And I'll just give an example there. How do we prevent orange peel? I looked at orange peel when I was at the university. People have looked at it before, and no one's come anywhere closer to solving the problem. It would be an industry question which I think a lot of people would like the answer for. And so if there was a centralized repository of important industry questions, then researchers like Clark would say, well, we're going to look at these answers. These are the questions that we're going to provide these questions. The mathematics fraternity have a $100,000 prize for anyone who solves the 10 most baffling mathematical problems. The Russian that solved 3 of them didn't want the prize money. That was $300,000 that he turned a blind eye to. Should we be offering a huge cash prize to research organizations that can solve some of the industry's biggest problems? These are some of the thoughts that we need to think about. And is the research and development department of a tannery the final repository of where our leather research gets done? The R&D department that typically does color swatch analysis or swatch preparation or tweaking the cost of a process a little bit. Is this where our leather research is going to end up? In the hands of technicians that just normally do color matching? I hope not. And very often research and development departments that do tannery research tend to keep the results to themselves, and it doesn't get out into the wider community. If we have a look at leather education quickly, there's really only one full graduate program that's available through the University of Northampton from BSc to PhD. That's quite a worrying factor, considering the fact that competition is normally quite healthy for BSc graduate programs or any other type of competitive product. The number of libraries I haven't put SATRA on here, sorry, Chris. But the repositories of information is quite sparse, and I don't think that we maybe take it seriously enough. Maybe we don't charge these institutions for protecting the information. I remember the big DLC toss-out a couple of years ago. Is that going to happen again in 40 years' time? Is it going to happen to BSLT? Is Reitlingen going to disappear off the map and disappear with all the information because it's all going to end up in a skip somewhere? Should there be an independent custodian of this information? Databases. Where are our massive repositories of leather information? Well, the amount of information that you can get in terms of raw data or just tannery names, lists of tanneries, telephone numbers, that really is the limit of our databases, whereas things like the medical industry will have huge databases of information which are freely accessible to anybody who's studying medicine, to have a look at journal articles, to have a look at information on medicine. We don't have anything like that. All we have is the yellow pages, essentially. And in our industry, our focus on IT is generally quite poor. Conflict of interest. Generally, a lot of our information comes from an organization that has a vested interest in pushing their particular agenda. And I'm not trying to insult anybody here. myself included, should we be trusting any kind of information? Surely the person putting the information across has some kind of agenda, so no information is truly impartial. But we need to start looking at the information that we find predominating in the tanning industry and realizing that there is a heavy agenda for a lot of that information. Somebody's trying to push a product or sell a tannery machine, or pushing a particular type of leather, or trying to push a particular type of research because it's funded by somebody. And we need to sometimes just take the information with a pinch of salt and realize that no information is truly impartial or independent. We very rarely commission independent research in the industry, which means that the amount of independent research available for people to look at is quite few and far between. The SLTC, being a charity, I think comes the closest to being one of the most impartial sources of information. This is an example. This gentleman's been given a stealth fight, and all he has to do is say something nice about the weapons industry on his blog. There is a hidden agenda with most things. The experience dilemma. Very often you can't get experience without spending time doing something, and we in the leather industry place a lot of weight on knowledge that comes from experienced people. If someone's been in the industry for 40 years, when they talk, we generally listen. But there are problems, and I'm not just talking about a personal thing that I have with somebody with 40 years experience, I'm talking about it from an information study research perspective. There is normally a problem with information that's been gained through experiential learning. And the classic example is Chinese whispers. If you play the game Chinese whispers through a long line of kids, the garbled message you get on the end very often happens in our industry. And I've been to many tanneries where I've heard somebody very experienced talking. They speak very eloquently and with a lot of authority, but some error has crept into their scientific understanding of the process, and there is a fundamental error in the explanation to somebody else. That will just get perpetuated through the generations. And so this is the difficulty of using experiential learning as your definitive source of information. And very often people will say, it works like this because I've been in this industry 40 years, so that's the proof that you need. Well, that's the same as saying alternative medicine is as good as normal medicine. It might be, I'm not refuting that. But at least normal medicine goes through the testing, the rigorous testing to show whether the drug is actually working or not. And we should be saying to our experienced colleagues, if you are so convinced that that is the case, you should have it tested. Put your money where your mouth is. The ultimate combination is somebody who's learned, who's been through a classical training method, maybe has been through a schooling system or university, maybe been through the University of Life, and then has added on to that the experience gained from 40 years in the tanning industry. Those people we should be placing a lot more emphasis on, rather than somebody who's got no education background, but it's just simply 40 years of experience and are trying to push their point across. The last point there is what I want you to focus on in this particular slide. In our industry, we tend to favour free. We like getting things free. The information must be supplied free, but this introduces a paradox. We don't trust free information because there's no professional warranty. If somebody says, here's a piece of information which I'm giving to you for free, you want to be able to say, if I use that information and it goes wrong, I want to come back to you. And so this is the paradox. We like free, but we want professional indemnity that goes with it. And there are very few international bodies that verify information, that say this is the definitive definition of whatever, or this is, IELTCS does some of that in terms of the glossary of leather terms, but there are very few other instances where we say, these are the 5 reasons for liming, or are there 6, or are there 7? Somebody should step forward and say, this is what liming does. So the 7 reasons, there's no redundancy in those reasons. We need to have some kind of vetting from an international agreement. Free information is normally the first to get lost because it has no value. So if you've been given free information, you don't mind losing it. And so this is, again, part of the paradox of free. We lose from free information that we lose it. Copyright laws are really a joke. A lot of people who think they're going to publish a textbook and make a lot of money from it, will soon find out that that book is going to be copied dozens of times by a number of people, and they're going to be able to get away with it. We can enable free through advertising. Magazines prove this again and again. And the internet is starting to show this, is a very viable business model. Facebook being a very good example, 500 million users, billions of dollars worth of value. They have no publicly traded shares. All the shares are owned by members of the organizations or shareholders of the organization. But they generate enough income to be able to supply the revenue that's needed to run their servers and to pay the people of the organization through very, very clever advertising. And Google is doing the same. If any of you are storing your documents on your PC, you need to investigate Google Docs, free storage of any type of information on Google servers, and allowing you to access that information anywhere in the world just by signing into your Google account. And they fund that through advertising. Very, very clever advertising, which tanneries probably need to think about. Information clubs, we don't have many of these in the tanning industry, and this is possibly an area where the society could become like the Society of Diocesan Colours, a keen provider of information for paid, or in some circumstances free information to people who need it. We need to be doing more subject reviews. We need to be having more media companies that help to publicize information that is available in the leather industry, helping to keep the information in the industry alive and to become memes, as we speak. And again, the trade organizations probably need to lead these. Secrecy, very controversial. Some people value secrecy quite highly. But the question you need to ask is, really, how long is the competitive advantage of knowing something and not letting anybody know it? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? How long does it take for someone in your company to leave and go to a competitor and tell them all your secrets anyway? So this is a very, very vague, grey area which a lot of people value quite highly but don't realise is actually a bit of a wishy-washy area. What is the cost of leaks? Chemical companies or machinery companies coming into your tannery, they don't do this, but just hypothetically, coming into your tannery, seeing the way you do something and then moving on to the next company and imparting that, that's a hypothetical situation that could occur. When you are secretive, is it because you're a market leader or are you a market follower? Are you the one that's generating all the products that everybody else is copying? If you're a follower, why are you being secretive? It doesn't make any sense. And you also need to remember that our industry is famous for taking secrets to the grave. I've actually seen secrets go into the skip outside the university. And that is the nature of our industry. We don't value our information and our secrets enough to be able to realize that there is a limit to how much competitive advantage you get from a secret, but it should become public knowledge already, because it's probably already out there, and you probably will just be helping to justify it. This idea of superstition. The Ivy League, Oxford universities, they practice this principle every year. Admissions get tougher and tougher, and the people that go through that organization get higher and higher quality, and as they go out, they become better and better adverts for that university. Tanneries could do with the same thing. The type of people that they're employing could get better and better and better and better until eventually they are highly qualified personnel. And if you're doing it right and keeping them, then at the end of the day, you'll end up like the Oxford universities or the Ivy League universities, where your output quality is quite high. The second point there is quite an interesting one. Information is passed on with the idea that those following the competition with old information will always be one step behind. It's a way of increasing your skill and knowledge. Some of the more technical points that need to come with this information, I was speaking to Clark about this at lunch. These are some of the areas of weakness I see. Our tanning industry, there are many, many new products that come onto the market all the time, and the people that produce those products are very, very secretive about the ingredients that go into that, all the technology that goes into it. And very often we aren't able to thoroughly test this as tanneries or as research organizations, because until we find out what the ingredients are or chemistry, we're working in the dark. So we can't fully appreciate these products, and we can't fully test them, and can't iron out some of the kinks without their assistance. I remember doing some work for a chemical company when I was at the university, and they would never ever tell us the chemistry. We just had to find their problems, find the solutions to their problems without knowing the chemistry. And it was impossible, it really was. Shoot upper. We know the science, and we know the process, but we've never ever tried to find the links in between. We should be able to say on a piece of paper, to make a basic piece of shoe leather, you need to follow this process. Do you think you can get tanners to agree that? It's impossible. But why can't we? Why can't we take all 450,000 shoe upper processes that have been published in the last 50 years, use a computer program which averages out what a shoe process is? We say, well, from 450,000 processes, this is the average shoe process. And that would then allow us to link the science a lot better. We'd be able to say, well, you can see from 450,000 types of processes, the pH must always be 4.8 after neutralization, for example. So that's an area of weakness where a lot of our information is quite weak. Industry statistics, everybody knows that our industry statistics is poor. If you ask anyone about the IT industry statistics, they'll have the numbers. There'll be 20 websites which will give you the industry statistics on the IT industry. Ask about the shoe industry or the leather industry, and the statistics are very poor. Tanneries think that they need to hold the information back somehow, because if they tell people how much they produce, then somehow they'll be able to compete with them. It's a fallacy. And why do we not question our existing facts? We don't do this rigorously enough. We don't have enough time, we don't have enough resource, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough leather research. Why don't we do it more? This is a huge weakness of the tanning industry. In the future, we're going to see the rise on the internet of what we call wikis, encyclopedia type websites. I tried editing the Wikipedia. I'll speak about that just now. That was a joke. Rise of free in the East. The East is coming around to the idea that supplying information for free or services for free is not a bad idea. So this is a very positive step. What's going to happen to the trade societies? This is an important part about what's going to happen to our leather information. If SLTC and ALCA actually disappear, we might find that our information becomes threatened even more. So what can we do? What can we put in place to protect that? What's going to take over as a custodian of information if these two organizations have to disappear? Is the East going to do it? This other point about global internet. A lot of farmers in Africa have decided that they're not even going to go down the personal computer route because the infrastructure in Africa is just not going to be good enough for them to be able to catch up. So they've all gone on to telephones and these smartphones that you get nowadays. I can't find mine, it's typical. These phones that you get nowadays, you can find any information on them. So farmers are using it to compare European trade prices with other countries' trade prices using their telephones. If you're a country or a tannery trying to catch up with technology, skip the personal computer, go straight onto the smartphone. And make sure that chemical companies and machinery companies are writing applications for those phones so that we're up to date with the developments that other industries already have. We need to look at the educational standards. We trust the educational institutes that we currently have, but what is the equivalence between all of these schools? What is a qualification from Chennai translate as a tannery manager if you're employing somebody from the Chennai leather school, or if you're comparing somebody from the SLT? What is the equivalence between the qualifications? Who is going to provide the standards of how we compare these qualifications? It doesn't currently exist. I know that the UK universities have their own grading system, but you as a tannery manager might find that it's a bit difficult to be able to compare people who are applying for jobs at your tannery. And again, who's going to be the custodians of our information in the future? If we have a quick look at some of the sites which the IT industry are really focusing on, we've got the social networking site, Facebook, 500 million users. If you wanted to advertise, I would advertise on Facebook. The information that Facebook users put in helps the advertising that Facebook push out to be highly specific to that particular individual. So the advertising that Amanda will see on her Facebook will be very different to the advertising on mine. I know you'll be there tomorrow. And it's because it's so tailor-made, it's so personal. And Google do the same thing. They personalize the advertising that goes to you. So if you're a tanner, you will get a lot of leather information on your Facebook. Easy to log in, easy to set up. That screen, once you fill it in, you've got a Facebook account. You get Amanda. Wikipedia, another useful resource in terms of the leather industry, whether you're using it as a fact-finding mission. Whenever there's an argument in my household, that screen comes up, wikipedia.org, and although it's not definitive, it has been shown to have a lot less errors of Encyclopedia Britannica, and if it has more errors on that particular topic, Wikipedia sorts the problems out faster than Encyclopedia Britannica does. So a radically changing way in which we access our factual information. Wikibooks is where people are starting to publish their textbooks. What's the point of producing a textbook when 2 weeks later it's out of date? What you need is a dynamic link where you've got a textbook that's constantly updated with new research and new findings coming into play. There is still a place for books, don't get me wrong, but these are very powerful tools for Tannery Manager. 2009, just the search page of Wikipedia was accessed that many times. This is the letter entry for letter on Wikipedia. And as I said, I tried editing some of this, but there's such a tight-knit bunch of editors on this. As soon as you start making changes, they will come in and correct it. Even though I tried to establish my credentials for changing the letter, it was changed back after, maybe it was my English, I don't know. But they're a very, very difficult lot to work with. So watch this space. There might be some developments that are going to take place in the information that we're going to have on leather on Wikipedia. It's quite a useful source. Students love copying Wikipedia, but it's very easy to find out when they are copying because you just search Wikipedia and it comes up. A lot of people talking about Twitter. This is the microblogging site for tanneries and for the allied industries of the tanning industry. Microblogging is very, very useful in terms of advertising and marketing. And for educational purposes, a lot of academics and teachers are using Twitter to keep their students updated and to check up on them and to be able to see what they're tweeting to see if they're actually doing their work or not. The number of tweets passed 45 million just after January. So it's again a very active centre and not necessarily leather related, but it's very useful. And I know Mike Redwood is a big proponent of Twitter. I'm in there. LinkedIn, if you are looking for staff, it's worth your while to get onto LinkedIn. A lot of human resource companies are now actively looking on LinkedIn for professional. If Facebook is for social, LinkedIn is for business, and professionals will put their identity onto LinkedIn, and people looking for professionals will often at the site for anybody who's on there. So it's also a nice way to track what your fellow colleagues are doing up to date and whether their positions change. It's a very useful website. And there's 75 million people on there at the moment. Again, very easy to log in, that's what you need to fill in, and you've got a LinkedIn account. I'm not going to talk about the privacy issues that surround these things. You need to be careful with any web-based internet. These are some of the questions that we need to be doing as tanneries. We need to be asking as tanneries and as tannery professionals. Should we be getting in these? Is there a return on investment by getting into these? Does the technology baffle you if you don't want to get into these? What is the cost of allowing it to happen? And just in summary, the letter information, the storage of our information, there's not enough. The review of our letter information, again, we're not doing enough. And very often it's too simplistic if it is being done. We don't reinvest enough, especially as a private enterprise. We don't have enough thinkers entering into our industry, prison companies do. And we don't have an equivalence of our vocational standards, what the various qualifications are. We need a lot more openness. We have too much secrecy. And as a result, it's affecting the information that is circulating, the problem solving that we're doing. And we probably need that the trade organisation actually lead the charge in helping us overcome this. That's it. Any questions?